Monday, February 1st. We traveled 12 miles yesterday, following the trail made by so many volunteers and Texans coming and going the past few months. It is no more than a trail churned by cattle, but there are a few marked posts to guide us. Papa says it is a miracle any wagon can survive the trip. We traveled only 8 miles today, due to a stretch of muddy trail. Riding in the wagon is so rough that we all walk except for Papa. Every time the wheel hit a bump, I saw a grimace of pain on his face. At noontime, while we broke to eat, Mama washed his face with a wet cloth that I had dipped in a creek. We rested 2 hours before moving on through the mud and cactus and rocks. The campfire feels grand. My legs are aching from walking all day. Papa shot a rabbit and Mama is roasting it on a spit. The days are so short now, at this rate of travel, it will take us a week to get to Uncle Isaac's. Tuesday, February 2nd. Wagon axle broke. Papa and Lem have been working on it all day. They are trying to make a new axle out of a post oak tree they chopped down. I heard Mama say she wished she had left alone on muleback. It would have been faster. Wednesday, February 3rd. The new axle didn't work properly, so Papa says we will have to abandon the wagon. He wants to go back to Gonzales for help. Mama said she would ride a mule the rest of the way to San Antonio alone, while the rest of us returned to Gonzales. But Papa told her she would do no such thing. We will all stay together. Drizzled all day. Mama prayed a long time. We are a miserable lot. Thursday, February 4th. We abandoned our wagon and started walking back towards Gonzales early this morning. Oh, how low our spirits were, especially Mama's. We had only walked 1 mile when we met some men riding our way. The leader, dressed in buckskin, was very tall and well-built, with friendly eyes, a pleasant smile, and a fiddle strapped to his back. When Papa told him about our situation and the broken wagon, the man said, "Well, Mr. Lawrence, David Crockett has never turned his back on a man in need. Me and my Tennessee boys will be happy to help." Lemuel's mouth about hit the ground when he heard the words, David Crockett. He stood in his tracks like a frightened rabbit. I had to nudge him in the ribs to get him moving. Mr. Crockett is the nicest man. He and his strong-shouldered friends had the wagon up and a new axle in the wheels before you could turn around. Mama cooked up some cornbread in hog grease, then cut big pieces of ham for all the men. They had hearty appetites and didn't seem to be in a hurry. Mr. Crockett said they had signed up with the Texas Army and were on their way to San Antonio to join the other volunteers at the Alamo. He said that General Sam Houston had reports that parts of the Mexican Army was headed for Goliad south of here, and that the rest of the Mexican Army was headed toward San Antonio, west of here. Mama told Mr. Crockett that she had a brother in Goliad, and another brother and a son in San Antonio. He leaned over and touched her hand. Says Mr. Crockett in a kind voice, "I've never met a braver lot than Texan wives and mothers. Your long-suffering and gentle nature is what those sons and brothers and husbands are fighting for." Mama took some comfort in his words. After lunch, Mr. Crockett took out his fiddle and played some merry tunes. He was right talented, I thought. We knew the words to some of the songs, and we all clapped hands and sang along like it was a revival meeting. Lem never got his tongue and spent most of the time gawking at Mr. Crockett, and never once asked him questions about bears and wildcats and such. Mr. Crockett told me I had the prettiest red hair he'd ever seen. Maybe he was joshing, but I will never forget him as long as I live, and I must admit meeting him will probably be the high spot of my life. Friday, February 5th. Green keeps tormenting me with questions about Uncle Isaac's store. It is the only thing on his mind of late. He seems to think that Uncle Isaac will open the doors and let Green have his pick of goods. Papa's leg is hurting fiercely. He can't find any position that brings comfort. We lost 3 hours crossing a swollen creek today. I think Mama is beginning to regret this trip. Saturday, February 6th. The ground leveled off and we traveled a good distance. I am covered with dirt from head to toe. My shoes are down in the heels. Too weary to write. Sunday, February 7th. A beautiful day with bright sunshine. We saw many longhorn cattle on the hillsides, horses, sheep, and goats too. Several Tejano families and wagons have met us as they flee San Antonio. They are friendly and seem concerned for us. They warn us not to go into town. A handsome Tejano rancher wearing a big black sombrero on his head and silver spurs rode up on a beautiful high-spirited white horse. He introduced himself as Señor Castillo and spoke English perfectly with a most pleasing accent. He said he owns a hacienda not far away. Many of the families in San Antonio are fleeing to ranches like his, for they feel there is going to be a big battle in town, and they do not want to be caught in the middle of it. When Mama told him about Uncle Isaac and Aunt Esperanza, Señor Castillo advised that they leave the town, because Santa Anna will not be merciful to any Texans he captures, nor will he be sympathetic to a Tejano woman who was married an Anglo. Señor Castillo generously offered to let Uncle Isaac and Aunt Esperanza stay at his hacienda, which he said was large enough to accommodate many people. Papa thought it was a good idea and got directions to the ranch. Mama felt a lot better. We arrived on a hill outside San Antonio at dusk and pitched camp. Mama is so eager to see if Uncle Isaac is well that she could hardly be made to stop, though it grew dark. I heard the tinkle of bells and saw a brown-skinned boy wearing a colorful striped serape herding some goats. I shouted, "Buenas noches!" He grinned and waved at me. We can see the lights of San Antonio in the distance, though it is several miles away. I'm so excited I cannot sit still. My dear little pencil is half gone. I pray Uncle Isaac has another in his store. Monday, February 8th. I have never seen so many buildings. The whiteness of their walls glistens in the sunshine. I can see the tall bell towers of no less than 3 mission churches. In the distance, I can also see the mission they call the Alamo. Its chapel has no bell tower, or if it ever did, the roofs must have fallen in. But the heavy doors and thick white stone walls look strong. There are rows of little stone rooms beside the chapel. Papa says that it is where the friars used to live when it was a mission. There are cannons perched on the walls now. Later. Late this afternoon, our wagon crossed the San Antonio River. Suddenly we were surrounded by houses and buildings. Some of the adobe walls are stained with dirt. Some have colorful shutters and bright flowers spilling out of the boxes. I've never seen so many people. Women wear the most colorful clothes, such as bright wool shawls over cotton skirts and blouses. Every house seems to have a woman sweeping the yard. Children, chickens, and goats run everywhere. I counted 10 burros pulling little 2-wheeled carts loaded with goods. My eyes are fat from the feasting. As we passed the town square, we heard music and shouting. There in the middle of it all, standing on a cart to make him higher than the others, was David Crockett. As he spoke, loud cheers rose into the sky. We saw Willis in the crowd, and Lemuel ran to join him. Then we saw Uncle Isaac, and you never heard such yelling and yahooing in your life. Mama climbed down and ran to give him a big hug. Uncle Isaac is a bear of a man, with shoulders broad enough to carry an ox. He picked Mama right up off the ground and twirled her around. Then he hurried over to the wagon and took me under one arm and Green under the other and twirled us around. He shook Papa's hand and announced in a loud voice that he was the proud father of a new baby boy. He had named his son George Washington, since it was nearing Washington's birthday. Mama laughed for the first time in I don't know when. Tuesday, February 9th. All of us, even Willis, are staying at Uncle Isaac's house. It is made of adobe and quite comfortable. Uncle Isaac is letting me use his bottle of ink and feather quill, for my pencil is almost a stub. I have not quite mastered the quill yet. I have splattered ink all over the page and my fingers are stained black. It is very slow going, for I must stop and dip the quill every few words. Uncle Isaac said he will try to find me a pencil. The baby looks like a shriveled red plum. I regret saying it, but it is true. He was born too early and is not filled out yet. Mama fusses over him and says he is the handsomest baby boy she's ever seen. I'm glad her own sons did not hear her. Aunt Esperanza is pale as death and too weak to lift her hand, but she managed to smile for Mama and me all the same. The last time I saw her, she was beautiful. but now she reminds me of a rose whose petals have faded and are ready to fall. It breaks my heart to see her this way. The doctor just shakes his head. He doesn't speak English, but he doesn't have to, for his opinion is written in his sad eyes. Poor Aunt Esperanza has no family to watch over her. She is an orphan. Her mother died many years ago, and her father, who was once wealthy, was killed by General Santa Anna's soldiers in the uprising in Zacatecas. That is why Aunt Esperanza never has anything nice to say about the general. Like all the Mexican people, she calls Santa Anna El Presidente. Wednesday, February 10th. Papa rested all day with his leg propped up. The servant, a plump woman named Sylvia, treats him like a king. I think he is enjoying it very much. Mama finally got Esperanza to eat some soup. Her color is looking better. Green, Lemuel, and I could hardly wait to visit Uncle Isaac's general store. There we met his business partner, Senor Ramirez. Like so many of the local men, he sports a thick black mustache. Senor Ramirez told us that we could each pick a gift. We spent an hour looking and touching. It was such a hard decision. I settled on some brightly colored wool yarn. It will be useful for so many things. Mama can knit it into a shawl or a scarf for Papa, and the scraps can be used to make hair bows for me and Mitty. Green embarrassed me with his greed, but he finally chose a bag of licorice and hard candy, just as I expected. Lem took a leather pouch to wear around his neck. Senor Ramirez insisted that each of us also take something he called a chicle. It is the resin of a tree, I think, and it chews and chews, never dissolving like food, and has a pleasant taste. Uncle Isaac found some pencils for me. Thursday, February 11th. Sylvia's husband, Raphael, drove Green, me, and Lem all over town in a donkey cart this morning. Raphael speaks choppy English with a heavy accent, but after a while I got used to it and understood him. Mostly. He knows who lives in every building and whose daughter married who, and which man had built which house. He showed us the houses where the battle had taken place back in December. Bullet holes dented the sides of walls, cannonballs left big holes in roofs and front doors, and fighting men had knocked out large hunks of walls in some of the nicest houses. What a shame war destroys beautiful things. Most of the women and girls go barefooted or wear sandals woven from yucca fibers. I never saw so many pretty young women. Their ruffled skirts swished as they walked by. Music and loud laughter came from taverns called cantinas, though it was in the middle of the day. On the way home, I saw a familiar figure walking down the street. It was Susanna Dickinson, carrying Angelina. Susanna was happy to see us. Angelina cooed and held out her hands to me. The Dickinsons are staying with the family of an important government official, Senor Musquiz. She invited us for supper tomorrow. I cannot wait to see the inside of that beautiful house. Friday, February 12th. For the fancy dinner, Mama ironed my best dress. I washed and combed my hair and put a piece of blue yarn in it. The Musquiz house was glowing with candlelight when we arrived. It is the most beautiful house I've ever seen. The furniture is dark and massive, with intricate flowers carved on the table legs. The chairs have such high backs that I even felt small when sitting. Heavy wax candles dripped in huge candelabras. Just before dinner, I heard a familiar voice and saw David Crockett walk through the door. Behind him was a dashing man dressed in fine clothing, speaking Spanish fluently. On his belt hung a huge broad-bladed knife. Willis whispered into my ear that the man was James Bowie, whose reputation as an expert knife fighter follows him wherever he goes. He was dashing and courteous, and had the manners of a fine Southern gentleman, but he drank too much wine. The food was delicious. We had bread made from wheat flour, not coarse cornmeal. I sipped my first wine and promptly choked on it. As expected, the conversation soon turned to Santa Anna and the war. There are about 150 Anglos left in San Antonio, mostly volunteers from the States, like David Crockett and his Tennessee boys. Several hundred volunteers went south to the Presidio at Goliad, where Uncle Henry is. The original Texans who gathered at Gonzales back in October have returned home to work their farms, for it will soon be time to plant crops. Susanna said the poor volunteers are in dirty, tattered clothes. They have not been paid yet and cannot even afford the cost of getting clothes washed. They may be dirty, but they'll stand and fight when the time comes, ma'am, Mr. Crockett said. Our biggest problem is figuring out who is in command. Some say Jim here, others say that young lawyer, Bill Travis. Boys, we've got to stop this bickering and stick together, or the Mexicans will stomp us into the ground. At the mention of Travis's name, Colonel Bowie's face turned red, and he made some very unsavory remarks about that hot-headed redhead. I was glad when the men retired to a room with a blazing fireplace and lit up cigars. Raphael drove us home in the donkey cart. Along the way, we heard guitar music and laughter and shouting coming from cantinas. Through open doors, I saw a beautiful Mexican girl dancing to fast music. Her skirt twirled, revealing ruffled petticoats. Her long black hair fell around her dark eyes, and her hands clicked small wooden instruments that Raphael says are called castañadas. She reminds me of a cat, so limber and graceful. The guitar strummed louder, and the castañadas clicked faster, and her legs spun around and around until I was dizzy. Suddenly the music stopped and everyone cheered. I can still hear the music of guitars coming through the windows. Sunday, February 13th. Aunt Esperanza's health is much improved. Uncle Isaac is so happy he can't sit still. He said as soon as Aunt Esperanza and the baby are strong enough, he will take them to the hacienda of Señor Castillo, who we met on the road. Papa says we will go back home soon, for it is time to plant corn. Sylvia took me, Green, and Lem to the marketplace today. It looked like the whole town was there buying or trading goods. It was like a big general store, only everything was outside. Sylvia said that today's market was not half as large as usual because so many people have fled town, and others are afraid to leave their houses because of the unruly volunteers wandering the streets. Lem said not to worry. It's too early for them to be awake, and we all laughed. Sylvia traded some big fat onions from her garden for a nice melon. She bought dried corn, yucca roots, dried red peppers, cactus pads with the needles picked off, and a basket of dried beans. I chewed more chicle until my jaw was sore. When we got home, Sylvia showed me how to make tortillas by forming a paste of cornmeal and water, rolling little balls, then patting them out with my hands. She also showed me how to make tamales by spreading cornmeal paste into dry corn husks, then putting in some meat and spices, then cooking the husks. Papa loves Sylvia's hot, spicy cooking. Lem, Willis, Papa, and Uncle Isaac had a hot pepper eating contest. Willis won, then ran down to the river and dipped his face in the water. Sunday, February 14th. The church bells began ringing very early this morning. Sylvia, dressed in her black dress and black shawl, invited me to attend Mass. I was surprised Mama said yes, and let Sylvia tie a fancy scarf around my head. San Fernando Church is huge, made from massive stones. It has a tall bell tower, and the bell is so loud it sounds all over the town. The priest greeted the people outside the door. The women wore their best. The rich ones sat at the front, wearing silks and lace and head coverings called mantillas. I have never seen such lovely clothing. The poorer folks, like Sylvia and Raphael, sat further back, wearing mostly plain cotton clothes and sandals. The head priest spoke Latin, so I didn't understand a word he said. He didn't jump up and down and stomp and spit like a Methodist minister. The singing was beautiful. Though I didn't understand, I was almost moved to tears. I wish Mitty could have heard it. After Mass, Sylvia and Raphael spoke to several friends. I don't know what they said, but I heard the word Santa Ana many times, and their faces looked worried. When we got home, Sylvia said to Uncle Isaac, "Santa Ana has reached the Rio Grande with his army. He will be in San Antonio in a week." Uncle Isaac dismissed the news with a wave of his hand. Says he, "It's just another rumor being spread by Santa Ana spies. They're everywhere. Santa Ana can't get here that fast. Besides that, it's winter. There's no food for the horses and mules." But a chill ran up my spine anyway. Suppose it's not a rumor. Suppose it is true. Monday, February 15th. I accompanied Sylvia to the San Antonio River, which flows beside the town. We washed clothes right in the water, scrubbing them with our hands. Many women were doing the same thing. They talked and laughed like it was a party. I recognized one of the girls as the dancer from the cantina. I asked Mama if I could have a ruffled red petticoat, and she said a decent girl had no need of ruffles. Tuesday, February 16th. Papa's leg is better, though he still uses crutches. He took the wagon to a wheelwright and had the axle repaired good and proper. He said we will be leaving for home soon. Baby Washington is getting stronger. His little face is plump and the wrinkles are gone. He's adorable now, with big black eyes and dark hair. Uncle Isaac is calling him Wash for short. As soon as Aunt Esperanza can walk, Wash will be christened. Then we will leave. I love this charming town, but I surely do not want to be here if the Mexican army arrives. Wednesday, February 17th. Papa wanted to test the sturdiness of the new wagon axle, so we drove Willis out to the Alamo across the river on the outskirts of town. Up close, the old mission is much smaller than I thought it would be. It is encroached upon by a small village, La Valita, made up of dozens of poorly constructed stick houses called jacales. Only a few men were at the Alamo being drilled by William Travis. The rest, I am told, are staying in town with Tejano families. The engineer was supervising the making of dirt ramps for loading cannons. Almiron Dickinson was repairing one of the cannons left behind by the Mexican general. David Crockett was busy building a temporary wall of earth located next to the chapel. One man was carving out holes in the barracks to make slots for the guns. It was a very warm day, and the men were sweating profusely. I was so glad to hear that Colonel Travis and Colonel Bowie have finally settled their squabble and agreed to share the command. Thursday, February 18th. Another warm day. Aunt Esperanza felt well, so we accompanied her to the church of San Fernando to have little Wash christened. He was so sweet, dressed in his white gown with elaborate lace and embroidery. Wash cooed and didn't cry, even when the priest sprinkled water on his head and it trickled down his cheeks. Aunt Esperanza and Uncle Isaac were beaming with pride, and a lot of people came over for dinner afterwards. By the end of the day, my aunt was exhausted. It is late, and everyone is asleep. Just now I was about to blow out the candle and retire to my room when there was a knock at the back door and a lot of excited talk in Spanish. Sylvia woke up Uncle Isaac and said, "El Presidente crossed the Rio Grande on Tuesday with 2,000 soldiers and is now only 4 days away from San Antonio. You must leave, Señor. It is too dangerous for you and La Señora." But Uncle Isaac said, "It's just more rumors spread by Santa Anna's spies. Remember, some men claim to have spotted Santa Anna crossing the Rio Grande 2 weeks ago, and that was false. Don't worry, Sylvia. We still have until spring. Go back to sleep." Sylvia whispered a stream of Spanish, then made the sign of the cross before returning to her quarters. Friday, February 19th. Uncle Isaac is boiling mad. Sylvia and Raphael packed up and left in the middle of the night. Now there was no one to cook or clean or help with the baby, except for Mama and me. Mama got the cornmeal and made a big pan of cornbread and cut up some ham. Aunt Esperanza hardly ate a bite and cried all morning. Sylvia had been her servant for 15 years and was like a mother to her. Aunt Esperanza is sure that Santa Anna will march into town any day now, and she wants to leave immediately. Uncle Isaac says she is not well enough yet. They argued and he left, fuming mad. He doesn't trust the Mexicans who brought the news. But Aunt Esperanza says that El Presidente is not one to sit back and take insult. She knows in her heart that he is planning revenge, and will show no mercy to the Texans and their Tejano friends. I am getting nervous. At supper time, Willis said there is to be a big fandango to celebrate George Washington's birthday on Monday evening. Papa said it appears to him there has been a fandango every night and a fiesta every day. Willis assures us that this one is going to be especially big. I asked Mama if I might attend, and she said only if Lem and Green can go along too. It's a poor bargain, but I accepted. Sunday, February 20th. Aunt Esperanza gave Mama material from one of her old silk dresses to make a new ensemble for the fandango. It is the most beautiful cloth I have ever seen, soft and smooth, not like the wrinkled homespun I'm used to. Mama worked on it all day while I did the chores and cooking. I made flour biscuits. Aunt Esperanza said they were delicious, but the men all laughed and said they might come in handy as targets for gun practice. Lem said they would make good filling for chinks in the cabin, as they surely appeared to be waterproof. Only Willis said they were right tasty, though I saw him wink at Uncle Isaac. No matter. I endured their teasing, because Mama was busy in a back room sewing my beautiful dress. Sunday, February 21st. Aunt Esperanza attended Mass early in the morning, and everyone made a big fuss over little Wash. I saw Susanna Dickinson riding in the Musquiz family's carriage, and she gave me a ride. It was my first carriage ride. How smooth and flawless it felt as the wheels rolled over the stone streets. So much better than the rough wagon. The horse was beautiful, with a small, delicate head and high-stepping legs. Susanna said she will be at the fandango, and is looking forward to it. She asked me which young man I wanted to dance with, and anxiety struck my heart. I never thought of it until that very moment. Now I can think of nothing else. If Gabble were here, there would be no question. But he is in Gonzales. The rain is pounding the roof now. Please, do not rain tomorrow night. Monday, February 22nd. Happy birthday, Mr. George Washington. And thank you, Lord, for clearing the skies in time for the fandango. Mama finished up my dress just in time, and I must say it is beautiful, though I was disappointed that she left off the ruffles. I peered at myself in the mirror until Mama said I was acting like Mitty Rowe. I got dressed much too early and felt all tingly waiting for the evening to arrive. Mama, Papa, and Aunt Esperanza stayed home. My brothers, Uncle Isaac, and I walked the party, our spirits as high as the moon. The light poured out into the night, and the guitar and fiddle music was loud enough to stir the dead. Davy Crockett played his fiddle merrily. Tejanos strummed their mellow guitars, and a Scotsman blew his squealing bagpipes until everyone covered their ears. The food was delicious, and the laughter and noise riotous. Willis danced with me 2 times, to loosen up his steps, he said. I tried to get Lem to dance, but he said he'd rather get bit by a skunk than dance with a girl. Green was willing, though, so I taught him every step I knew to the Virginia reel, the cotillion, and the waltz. A German man showed me and Susanna how to dance the polka, which was so lively. I thought my heart was going to burst. Most of the Mexican women didn't know the steps, but the rough Texans dragged them across the floor anyway, hooting and hollering. I have never attended so grand a party, and could not believe how swiftly time passed. There were no boys my age, so most of my dances were with Green, Willis, or Uncle Henry. How I wished that Galba was there. Around 11 o'clock, I spied a boy about 16 years old looking at me from across the room. He came over and introduced himself as James Allen, then asked for a dance. We danced 5 times. What a wonderful dancer he is. We talked a right smart. I fibbed and said I was 14, and prayed the good Lord didn't strike me down with lightning. James said I was mature for my age. I will write the next thing that happened very small so that no one will see it. He kissed me. I think he said, "You are very pretty," but my heart was pounding in my ears so loud I can't be sure. Then Len ran up and said we had to go right away. James squeezed my hand and said he hoped you to see me around. I wanted to stay. Oh, how I wanted to stay and dance some more. But we had promised Mama to be home by midnight. The fandango was still going strong as we left. I saw a Tejano talking excitedly to David Crockett and William Travis. They had worried looks on their faces. I arrived at Uncle Isaac's house expecting to find all asleep, but every candle and lamp was lit. Papa's wagon was piled high with furniture and belongings, and so was the little donkey cart. It was the same all over town. Every house was a flurry of activity. This time there was no mistaking the messengers. Santa Anna and his soldiers were camped at the Medina River, only 8 miles west of town. Had it not been for the sudden heavy rain of yesterday, he would have already been here. I ran inside and Papa shouted at us for being so late and asked where Willis was. We told him Willis was still at the fandango. While Papa and Uncle Isaac nailed boards over the windows and locked the garden gates, Mama and Aunt Esperanza and I packed food, clothes, bed linens, and silverware. It is now 4 o'clock in the morning. Mama has just said to put up my diary and get into bed, as we will leave early. I will finish my story when I can. Tuesday, February 23rd. All night long we heard the rumble of carts and wagons as citizens fled the town. We awoke late and found that the donkey was gone. We had to remove everything from the cart and take some things out of the wagon and leave them behind. This took a while. Mama was very upset, as the donkey cart was going to serve as a bed for Aunt Esperanza and the baby. Willis was still not back, and Mama refused to leave without him. It was after lunch before we found Willis. Mama shouted, "The Mexicans are upon us, Willis! Climb into the wagon!" But Willis shook his head and said, "It's just another rumor started by Santa Anna's spies." The words were hardly out of his mouth when the bells of San Fernando Church started ringing wildly. Everyone stopped and turned toward the church, whose white steeple rose above the trees and rows of adobe houses. All of a sudden, volunteers began running for the Alamo across the river on the outskirts of town. "The Mexican army is here!" Their cries filled the air up and down the streets. Willis grabbed his rifle and slung it over his shoulder. "I guess you are right this time," he said, grinning. Papa took Willis's arm and said, "Son, it's foolish to stay. They outnumber you 10-1. Don't you know that?" But Willis shook his head and said, "I'm not worried, Papa. The Alamo is strong. If we can stall Santa Anna here for a few days, the rest of Texas will have time to rally." "But why does it have to be you who stays?" I cried out and hugged him with all my heart. Willis tweaked my nose and said, "Because if I ran away, I'd never be able to look you in the eyes again, Cinda." He smiled. "Don't worry. We've whipped the Mexicans before, and we'll whip 'em again." Mama's eyes filled with tears as she pushed her favorite handkerchief into Willis's hand and told him to pray every night. I gave him the yarn for my hair, and he tied it around his rifle barrel. Uncle Isaac held Baby Wash real close, like he was smelling him, then kissed him and placed him in Aunt Esperanza's arms. He said something to her in Spanish, and her eyes got real big. She screamed and began weeping hysterically. Uncle Isaac had to tear himself away. He kissed Mama, shook Papa's hand, then put on his hat, and he and Willis joined the other running men. We watched Uncle Isaac and Willis running down the street toward the footbridge that crossed the San Antonio River. Papa had a funny look in his eyes, and when he turned to Mama, she said in a firm voice, "Don't you think of it, Mr. Lawrence. You have a family that needs you. The Texans don't want an old cripple leg like you. You can help them better by getting word back to the colonies." It seemed like forever before Papa heaved a sigh, slammed his hat over his brow, and climbed up in the wagon. He shook the reins and cracked the loose ends over the poor mules' backs. Later. We are now camped many miles east of San Antonio. Earlier, as we left town and passed near the Alamo, I saw some Tejano women and children taking refuge in the old mission. Just before the gates closed, a horse charged in. Seated behind the rider was a pretty young woman with dark hair holding a little girl in her arms. It was Susanna Dickinson and little Angelina. She was keeping her promise. My heart felt sick at the sight. By 4 o'clock we had cleared La Valita outside town, and were approaching our first hill when we heard loud cheers from the town and voices shouting, "Viva Mexico! Viva el Presidente!" Drums pounded and bugles sounded clear, sharp notes. Papa urged the mules faster, and they broke into a little trot. I turned around and saw a sight that made my heart stop. Row after row of Mexican soldiers marching down the street. The sun glistened off their bright uniforms, some red and blue, others all white, and their fixed bayonets. At the head of the column rode officers on prancing horses. One horse had an arched tail that shined like corn silk. The small man sitting erect on its back wore a glorious uniform, and his sword scabbard twinkled. Surely it was General Santa Anna himself. I tried to count the soldiers, but it was hopeless. As we crested a second higher hill, I saw that the line of soldiers extended westward from town, and across the San Antonio River, in an empty prairie, the little white Alamo stood alone like David against 1,000 Goliaths. We heard a big boom and saw smoke from the 18-pounder cannon atop the Alamo wall. In the town plaza, a soldier hoisted a red, white, and green Mexican flag, and then another flag, blood red in color, from the top of the San Fernando church steeple. Green asked Papa what the red flag meant, but he didn't reply. Lem whispered in my ear these chilling words. It means no quarter. Every man in the Alamo will be put to death. It is dark now. 2 messengers have just galloped by carrying a plea from Colonel Travis for reinforcements. I wonder how many men will come to his aid. Wednesday, February 24th. This morning we were awakened by the sound of steady cannonade from the direction of San Antonio, and we knew the Alamo was besieged. With each distant boom, my heart ached for dear Willis and Uncle Isaac, for Susanna, and for everyone inside the old mission. The cannonade lasted all day long. Every time we heard the loudest boom, that of the 18-pounder in the Alamo, Papa would say, "The Alamo still stands." We camped in a live oak grove. Papa says Senor Castillo's ranch is only a few miles away. During the night we heard thundering horse hooves, and Papa grabbed his old pistol. It was yet another express courier on his way from the Alamo. While he rested his horse and drank a cup of coffee, I read the message to everyone by the light of the campfire. To the people of Texas and all Americans in the world. Fellow citizens and compatriots, I am besieged by 1,000 or more of the Mexicans under Santa Anna. I have sustained a continual bombardment and cannonade for 24 hours and have not lost a man. The enemy has demanded a surrender at discretion. Otherwise, the garrison are to be put to the sword, if the fort is taken. I have answered the demand with a cannon shot, and our flag still waves proudly from the walls. I shall never surrender or retreat. Then, I call on you in the name of liberty, of patriotism, and everything dear to the American character, to come to our aid with all dispatch. The enemy is receiving reinforcements daily, and will no doubt increase to 3,000 or 4,000 in 4 or 5 days. If this call is neglected, I am determined to sustain myself as long as possible, and die like a soldier who never forgets what is due to his own honor and that of his country. Victory or death. William Barrett Travis, Lieutenant Colonel Commander. The messenger said he planned to round up some men and supplies in Gonzales and return to the Alamo. Mama told him to take whatever meat was in our smokehouse. Papa said he would join the men as soon as he had dropped off Aunt Esperanza and got his family back home. Mama has been silent since. Thursday, February 25th. We reached the hacienda before noon and unloaded the wagon. Senor Castillo and several friends were on their way to join Captain Juan Seguin, a polite and intelligent landowner who was the leader of the Tejanos fighting against Santa Anna. The spacious house has a courtyard in the middle with a well and flowers. Servants bustled everywhere, and fat livestock grazed on the hillsides. Senor Castillo invited all of us to stay there, but only Aunt Esperanza accepted his offer. She felt safe there and wanted to stay as close to San Antonio as possible, where Uncle Isaac is. Though Papa's leg was hurting from all the jostling, he insisted on leaving immediately. As the day progressed, the weather changed. By afternoon, an evil-looking squall line rolled in the distance, signifying a blue norther. The storm struck with fury, and the temperature dropped to almost freezing. We are now huddled inside our wagon in the middle of the woods. The north wind howls like a demon, and so do the wolves out on the prairie. We heard the booming 18-pounder, though more faintly now. Green cheered and shouted, "The Alamo still stands!" My fingers are too cold to write more tonight. Friday, February 26th. A cold, miserable day as we crossed a stretch of open prairie. We children huddled in the back of the wagon under the quilt, but couldn't get warm. It was too cold to stop and cook, so all we ate all day was cold, tough beef jerky. We are still many miles from Gonzales. Papa is anxious to keep going, but Mama said there is no use in busting an axle on some unseen rock or hole. I hope that Willis is warm. Saturday, February 27th. Another bitter cold day with a strong north wind. It was hardly above freezing when we awoke. Papa's leg was so stiff he could not walk. Mama built a fire and warmed the blanket and wrapped it around Papa's leg. Then she and Lem lifted him up onto the wagon. Mama took the reins herself. It warmed up some during the day, but the wind did not cease. In the evening, we came across a group of men pitching camp. Nearly all of them were Gonzales men. The leader said they had organized as soon as they received the first message from Travis and were headed for the Alamo. I saw 3 boys no older than 16. I was dismayed that one of them was Galba. He smiled and asked me where Willis was. I told him he was in the Alamo. I handed Galba the blue ribbon from my diary and asked him to carry it for good luck. That pleased him. My heart is sick, sick, sick. Mama asked me to write down all the names of the men, in case someone needs to know later on. They are Isaac Baker, John Kane, George Cottle, Jacob Darst, Squire Damon, William Deardriff, William Fishbaugh, John Flanders, D. W. Floyd, Galba Fuqua, John Garvin, John Gaston, who sometimes goes by his stepfather's last name, Davis, James George, Thomas Jackson, Johnny Kellogg, who was only 19, Andrew Kent, George Kimball, William King, Albert Martin, Jesse McCoy, Thomas Miller, the richest man in town, Isaac Millsaps. I can't believe he went off and left his blind wife and 7 children behind. George Negan, William Summers, George Tumlinson, Robert White, Claiborne Wright. There were also some men who don't live in Gonzales, but were traveling with them. David Cummings from Pennsylvania, Jonathan Lindley, a land surveyor, Charles Despalier, who is a friend of Travis, and the redhead, John Smith, who was guiding them to San Antonio. Papa decided to drive on home, though it was dark. When we got to the house, Mama and Lem had to carry him from the wagon. Blood stained his pants where the wound had reopened. Papa is suffering, but I think Mama is relieved. With his leg hurting so bad, surely he will not return to San Antonio. We were too tired to eat supper. It feels good to be home, but everyone is strangely quiet. Green dragged his mattress into the room and put it beside mine again. Sunday, February 28th. Another cold day. Papa was too sick to get up, though he tried. When Mama told him that the mules were too exhausted to move, he finally fell back in bed. Though he is against the war, he still feels it is his duty to help. First thing this morning after chores, I ran to Mitty's house. We hugged and cried like babies. I gave her some colored yarn and a piece of the chicle to chew. I told her all about San Antonio, the Alamo, and the Mexican Army. Mrs. Rowe led us in a prayer for our boys. Hearing it made me so sad I had to leave. I forgot to tell Mitty about James Allen and my first kiss. I am glad to be among my friends, but the town does not look right anymore. There are only a few men left, and most are old or crippled like Papa. Another convention is to be held March 1st at Washington on the Brazos. Monday, February 29th. Leap year day. Some say it is a bad omen. Papa got up early and saddled a mule. He said he was going to San Antonio despite his bad leg. Mama begged him to stay. When Papa said Texas needed him, Mama broke loose and yelled, "Texas! I've already given a baby daughter, a son, and 2 brothers for Texas. When is the good Lord going to say enough?" Then she ran behind the smokehouse. Papa looked miserable and didn't say a word for a long time. Lem took the reins and said, Papa? I'll go in your place." Papa looked shocked. Then he hugged Lem real tight and his eyes got all watery. I do believe that is the first time I ever saw Papa look at Lem with pride in his eyes. He cleared his throat and said, "No, Lemuel, you stay here. I think even the Lord draws the line at sending a 15-year-old boy into battle." Tonight is bitter cold. The sky is clear and I see a million brilliant stars. I can't help but think about Halley's Comet that we saw back in October before all this war business started. All I wanted back then was to dance with Galba and have a red hair ribbon. How senseless and childish those things seem now. As I pull my shawl around my shoulders, I think of Willis behind those cold, cold mission walls. And what about our town's men, who just left to answer Colonel Travis's call for help? How will they ever get through the lines of Mexican soldiers? Oh, how I wish this war had never started.